Welcome to the Casting Across Fly Fishing Podcast. I'm Matthew of castingacross.com, where I explore the quarry and culture of fly fishing. This episode is going to be a little bit different. One, it's going to be shorter, and two, it's going to be another episode that is in our Cast1 series, aimed a little bit more for new anglers, but with something for everybody. Let me explain why both of those things are happening in the order I presented them in. First one is going to be shorter because I'm a few hours away from hopping in my car in New Hampshire and driving down to New Jersey for my attendance at and presentations at the fly fishing show in Edison. Last week, I was in Marlborough, Massachusetts, and had some presentations there. It was awesome to see a handful of Casting Across podcast listeners at both presentations. It's good to talk to people. That's always a lot of fun. And I had just generally a great time. I brought my kids to the second day on Saturday, and they enjoyed it as well. I'm sure I'll talk more about that in the coming weeks. So that's why it's going to be shorter. I got places to go, things to do, socks to pack, stuff like that. Secondly, why is this going to be a Cast1 episode if it's going to be relatively short? Well, what I'm going to present today on the podcast in an abbreviated form is one of my presentations from the fly fishing show. So I have two that I presented in Marlborough, Massachusetts, and three that I'm going to be doing in Edison, New Jersey. And one of the ones I'm presenting in both, one of the ones that's like a seminar, kind of one of the bigger presentations, nicer chairs, things like that, better audio and better AV equipment, is called Translating Small Stream Skills to Big Water. And I think this is a topic that is great for any and all anglers. And as I've made this presentation over the last few years, it's been great to have new anglers attend in person, as well as folks who have been fly fishing for quite a while and just kind of want to help categorize how and why they approach large rivers if they're primarily small stream anglers. And so that is right in the heart of this Cast1 series of podcasts on Casting Across, which again, if you've never fly fished, you're just thinking about it. This is being recorded in the winter, but if you're listening to it in July, you're just now starting to fly fish. You got some stuff for Christmas. Somebody took you out once, and you're interested in doing it yourself. This is the kind of knowledge that will be helpful for you to have in the back of your head, even as you go fishing for the first time, or if you've been fishing like 3 or 4 times, as you think about what that next step is. Because the thesis for this whole presentation and this whole idea is that a lot of people are comfortable fly fishing small streams. And the primary reason for that is that you can stand dead center in a small stream. And for wherever you live, small stream is, of course, quite subjective. I know a lot of the small streams that I like fishing when I'm kind of like bushwhacking and blue lining, that is to say, looking on the map, trying to find those little blue lines that may be kind of far in the recesses of valleys and deep away from roads. I might be standing in something that is 15 or 20 feet wide. Or even smaller. And that's an awesome way to pursue wild and native fish. But then I think about the river that's just behind my house, and I think it's kind of a small stream, especially because it's in like the top half of the river. And there's places where it's 30 and 40 feet wide, and it's still kind of a smaller stream. But you can stay in the middle of, let's say, a 30-foot wide river, and you can cast to either bank. And as standing from that position, you can say, from this bank, I see exactly what's happening in the flow of the river, and as I move from left to right, I can really take in and digest everything that's there. And even if I don't have a lot of confidence in where the fish are, I can reasonably start casting from left to right and cover the entirety of a river's width, and then as I move upstream, cover the a couple hundred yards of its breadth over the course of a few hours. And so because of that, there is the ability to quickly ascertain and become familiar with and comfortable with a stretch of water. And so I think that's why a lot of folks gravitate to those smaller streams. There's other reasons, of course. The proximity. We are all closer to small water than we are to large water, if that makes sense, just the way watersheds work, right? And then also wading, it's a little bit easier and safer. There's more access. You don't necessarily need a watercraft for a lot of places. But I think for most of us, it's that I can fish this river and not have to break it down a whole bunch, especially if you're fishing small mountain streams. I mean, you can realistically fish plunge pool to plunge pool to plunge pool, passing up all the water. I mean, you're passing up great opportunities, but if you just want to get into fish and you know the drill, you can go to plunge pool to plunge pool to plunge pool, and you can catch lots of fish. That is to say, plunge pool being like where the little waterfall empties out, and you know that there's probably a deeper water there. There's lots of oxygen there. There's probably food sources for fish there, and you can stand kind of back behind it. You are shielded from those fish's peripheral vision by that waterfall coming in, and just by the topography of the stream and the land around it, and you can kind of easily target some decent fish. But of course, there's more to it than that. But what I want to share, and here we go, 5 minutes in, right, is how you can take some of those skills and take them to that large river. Now, it may be that you fish that 10-foot wide stream, and now these skills are applicable to that 30-foot wide stream. Maybe that be that you're fishing that 30-foot wide stream, and this is now going to be to that, expansive, giant river that you like to fish. And for me, this first came into stark contrast, actually, as I was coming home from a fly fishing show. Now, this was years and years ago. I was living in Pennsylvania. It's probably 20 years ago, and there they have I think it's called the Pennsylvania Outdoor Expo or something like that, and it's enormous. I think the last time I drove through Pennsylvania, which was just earlier this year, I think the billboard says the world's largest outdoor show, which makes sense because it's not just fly fishing. Fly fishing is a tiny little fraction of it. Back when I was not only attending there, but I worked a booth for Trout Unlimited. There's conventional angling. I mean, everything from, bass gear to saltwater gear. And then there's hunting. And that is just, everything in Pennsylvania, everything in the United States. And then any animal you can shoot legally, they've got a booth for that and 3 or 4 outfitters that will take you to do it. And then camping, RVs, stuff like that. So very quickly, it gets to be very, very big. So anyway, driving home from one of these shows, and I am on the I-81 bridge going westbound over the Susquehanna River. I guess it would be southbound technically, since it's an odd-numbered road. Southbound on 81 over the Susquehanna. At this point in time, the river is a mile wide. And I had not fished it in a long time. And it's the middle of winter, and I've also just spent a lot of time indoors at the fly fishing show, and I'm thinking, at the outdoor show, and I'm thinking, I need to go fishing. I just spent money and time indoors. I need to get outdoors. I'm looking at this river, and I'm thinking, I can't fish this. Well, there was slower traffic that day, which in central Pennsylvania meant that you're still going 30 miles an hour. And I'm noticing these braided islands in the middle of this river. And if you've ever driven over it, you probably know what I'm talking about. And I just got to thinking, you know what? I don't need to fish this whole river. I just need to go to that spot. And I need to fish in between those islands. And right there's this small little stream within this much, much larger, this mile-wide river. If I can just walk, wade, paddle out there, then I should just focus on that, not worry about everything else. And for me, as an angler in my early 20s at that point in time, I thought, okay, this is a good idea, and that's something that I started to do. And so the first thing that I would say to you, if you are a new angler or an angler who is just an expert at fly fishing small streams, and you've never taken that jump to get to those larger rivers, or you've never decided to do it on your own, maybe you say, I fish lots of larger rivers, but it's been with a guide, it's been with somebody who runs a drift boat, something like that. Have the confidence to go out to those rivers, and the first thing that I suggest to folks is allow bass and panfish to be your tutors. Allow bass and panfish, warm water fish, to be your tutors, because we sometimes look down on pumpkin seeds and bluegills and largemouth bass. But the reality is that a lot of times in river systems, they function, especially when there's a good flow, they function, ecologically speaking, in the same niches as trout, specifically smallmouth bass. Now, I think largemouth bass and big smart panfish will do a lot of the same things that trout will do. But when there is a good flow, find a river with a good flow that has these warm water fish. And although there's certainly plenty of variables that differentiate the way that a smallmouth bass or a largemouth bass may lay in a river versus the way a trout will, generally speaking, you're going to start to pattern where to look for fish in riffles, in runs, in eddies, behind boulders, on banks, at bridge pylons, all these different river structures where you're going to be fishing for warm water fish, out there in shorts and old tennis shoes, tossing poppers and streamers. You are going to begin to pattern your brain to where to look for fish. Yeah, there's the benefit of just getting out there and casting. And that's one of the things I mentioned in this presentation. I'm actually kind of quickly going through the slides as I'm revising it in anticipation of making this presentation on Friday, tomorrow. Yeah. Um, I have a slide that says, think about the kids. And think about think about the children. Think about how you were when you maybe started fishing when you were a kid. Did you worry about the size of the water body? If anything, you probably thought as a little kid, I want to go fish in the biggest water body possible because that's where the most fish are going to be. Instead of having this mentality of I need it small so I can kind of grasp it all and understand it all, as a kid, it probably was like, I don't want to go to the little pond. Take me to the ocean. I want to catch the shark. I want to catch a whale. I want to catch whatever's out there. And what would you do as a little kid? You maybe had your Snoopy rod. You had the little Zebco. And you put the worm on the hook and you put the bobber on there and you just chucked it out there. Maybe if you had a little bit of sophistication, you wanted to go out deeper. Maybe you wanted to cast towards a rock or a fallen log or some weed or something like that. But generally speaking, you just put it out there. And I think that's one of the next things that I would encourage folks to do. One, look to the panfish and bass to be your tutors. Two, just get out there and just start fishing. Now, of course, there's going to be some very low probability spots in any river. Even like a famous trout river is going to have low probability spots. That's where getting a little bit of intel helps to at least have a stretch figured out. But I can think of some really large rivers that I fish here on the East Coast. And there's times where I have seen fish and caught fish in just very, very bizarre and random places. And a lot of times that is because these rivers, if they have a reputation for having trout, they are cold. And so although there will be higher probability spots and lower probability spots, they have the carrying capacity for fish bank to bank in most places. And so, yeah, you're going to find you're going to be that blind squirrel that finds a nut, right? You're going to be the broken clock that is right a couple times simply by casting out into the middle of the river. And so, encouragement one, chase those warm water fish, start to pattern where fish live in bigger rivers. Two, just get out there and give it a try. There may be some discouragement, but if you get a little bit of guidance, if you see where other people are fishing, don't get up on top of them, but come back there the next day or, talk to a fly shop. Any fly shop worth its salt is going to at least give you some basic parameters of where you should go. So those seem relatively simple. Now here is where I think this is where I spend the most time in my presentation, probably only 5 or 7 minutes on the podcast today. That way, if you were listening to this on your way to the fly fishing show in New Jersey, or this is being listened to some other time of the year, and you're planning on going to a fly fishing show in 2027, there's still value in attending my presentation. But I would say the most important thing is to look at your big river like a bunch of small streams stacked side to side next to one another. So look at your big river and consider it as a bunch of small streams stacked side to side from bank to bank. So what do I mean by that? Well, think about a river where there's overhanging trees on one side. Let's just say it's 75 feet wide. Overhanging trees on one side, and but it's relatively shallow. But then it goes into a little bit of a faster riffle because it's shallow. And then it's a deeper segment of water. And then it's up against maybe a cliff or a little bit of a gradient. And so what do you have? You have in that one river where you could be standing dead center in a 75-foot river. So you have, roughly 40 feet on either side of you. You could work your way towards the one bank and maybe fish something like terrestrials underneath those overhanging branches. Now, that might be the only way you fish on a small stream that has a lot of canopy cover. You might say, I'm fishing terrestrials. Why? Because there's trees above me. Okay. All you need to do is focus on that. Just focus on those overhanging trees. There's a formative moment, again, for me when I was a young angler in Western Maryland. I went to the Youghiogheny River, super wide where it was, higher flows because they were releasing water for kayakers that day. And I was just overwhelmed by the volume of the water and the breadth of the water. And so I just went to the shoreline with, 75 plus feet of river behind me and just cast to, the 10 feet of shoreline in front of me with hoppers and with beetles and ants and caught fish all day. It was fantastic. I mean, was I leaving fish? I'm sure I was, but I found a pattern and I found something that worked and I fished that and it was a lot of fun. So that was I think the first thing to think of. Say there's overhanging branches. Secondly, there's a riffle, all right, that you're moving towards the middle of the river. The water is still shallow, but there's a little bit more flow. There's a riffle. This would be the kind of place where you could, potentially fish a dry fly if there's a hatch, or you could fish your nymphs. If you have started doing some tight line nymphing, this is a great way to just systematically work up through a run and try to find the fish that are laying in, taking all those bugs that are coming by. Once you determine the depth at which your fly needs to bounce and tick along the bottom, then you can just work your way up through that run, knowing that that kind of flow, knowing that that kind of riffle and run is going to give you a good opportunity to get into fish. So once again, now moving from far, river right, we got overhanging trees on one side. You're fishing your terrestrials. You're again assuming this is the late spring or summertime, and then you're fishing in those riffles. You're fishing the that as its own little stream, and you're fishing nymphs. Then you move to your left now. So you're going from your right to your left, and there is the deeper water, maybe the pool. Now this is where you're going to see probably some more defined rise forms, assuming there's bugs coming off. Right? You can't always have it perfectly, and you can fish a pool like this with nymphs, but this should be your ideal spot for seeing what fish are rising to. And you can fish this pool all by itself in that way. You can fish this pool by, working your way up through it, assuming there's bug activity. And yes, there may be a lot of things happening behind you in that riffle, potentially or actually, but this would be a place where if you want to fish dry flies, then don't worry about the rest of the river. Just worry about this pool. It may have a little bit of current. It may be relatively still, but just work your way up through it, sight casting to fish, or one of the awesome things on large rivers like this, you may have fish that are ranging a little bit, particularly if it's something like midges or things like that, little smaller bugs or caddis that are flitting around, that you may have the opportunity to just start casting your way up through that pool and either casting to rising fish or casting in the vicinity of rising fish, and you have the opportunity to fish just this big wide pool. In as much as if you were in a stream that was just a long segment that it's a pool with two banks on either sides of it. Now you're fishing to a long pool in the middle of a large river. And then finally, we get over to our bank that's a little coming off of a steeper gradient. And so this is a phenomenal place to throw streamers and work streamers along the edge of that bank. Because think about, again, what do we have here? We have a deeper pool that then goes to a bank. Now, casting there might be a little bit harder because we have a deeper stretch. Again, this is all hypothetical, but I can think of a dozen places that I've fished that are like this. A deeper pool that goes to then a steeper drop off into the stream from the bank. It's a great place to pull streamers. You have a few things going for you. You have the undercut potential from that stream bank where you have bigger fish that are finding that kind of security and finding those kind of lies where they can sit into a spot where they don't have to fight the same kind of current as they would if they're out in the middle of the river. They also have the opportunity to ambush both at that undercut bank and at that drop off into the pool. So whether you're kind of standing on the bank, working your way up with the pool on one side of you and the bank on the other, or you're able to cast across that pool. And again, now what you've done is you've eliminated that pool as a fishing possibility. You're targeting that bank. And yeah, as you pull your streamer back through, you swing your streamer, just allowing it to drift back through that pool. The fish that are in there may certainly pursue it, but your target is that bank. And I think that's another thing, kind of leaving that fourth chunk of the river aside. Remember that you can be targeting one thing and focusing on that, and another aspect of the river may come into play. So in this example, you are targeting the stream bank, but you're stripping back through the pool. You're maybe not making those 10-foot, 15-foot casts into the pool in front of you unless you see a fish, but you're making those 25, 30, 40-foot casts to that stream bank, and you are allowing it to drift through that alongside that stream bank, and then, of course, you're stripping and retrieving through that pool, which, again, is going to emulate the natural situation that those fish are used to seeing, as you may have a bait fish that is moving along the stream bank and then starts to retreat back into the deeper water, which may trigger a strike response from those larger predatory fish. So another example of that would be, if you're casting dry flies into the pool and all of a sudden you're hearing splashes behind you, it's going to, be totally fine to turn around and start casting dry flies into those riffles. Don't limit yourself. I think that's one of the exciting things about picking a spot, picking a presentation, having a target, and working that. and working it, not abandoning it right away if it doesn't work out, but then realizing the flexibility to say, okay, from the same spot, potentially with the same fly, with the same leader formula, I can turn around and make a relatively similar presentation, adjusting for the different way that the character of this stream works. And what you do in that situation is, you understand that you have targeted a particular location, maybe even a particular fish, and you are making an appropriate presentation for that fish, but you now have the flexibility to fish for other fish without really even moving. I mean, you might just have to turn around, cast 180 degrees in a different direction, or maybe even just make your cast, instead of making to the bank, just into the main, stem of this river and make a different presentation. And you might find that, okay, the fish are actually holding in this pool. They're not holding against the bank, they're holding in this pool. So I don't need to cast 40 feet. I can focus on this pool. Or, I was standing here and because the riffle's right behind me, I'm hearing splashes. I'm going to still fish the streamer for a while, but now I realize there's actually insect activity happening such that there's either emergers or dry flies coming off. I'm going to, without doing anything otherwise, turning around, maybe adding a little bit of lightweight tippet, putting on a dry fly. Now I can cast. I'm not moving. I'm casting to these rising fish. I'm not having to move upstream from a pool into a riffle. Instead of fishing the pool that's in front of me, I'm not fishing the riffle that's behind me. This is one of the awesome things about larger river systems. It presents you with all these opportunities without really having to move a whole lot. There's been a lot of days on rivers like the Little Red River in Arkansas, or the Delaware River system in New York, where I basically stay in one spot. I fish dry flies, I fish streamers, I fish nymph rigs, but I'm effectively in the same spot. There's just such a diversity of angling opportunities within a relatively small range in some of these larger rivers. So again, hopefully this gives you some ideas. There's a lot more. I mean, that was basically a quarter of the presentation that I give. But again, with this kind of cast one mentality, if you haven't fished big rivers, this will hopefully give you an encouragement. B, if you have, this might be a good way to not only think about it, but also communicate that to somebody else who you are showing how to fish. If you want to take someone to a big river and you're like, I don't do fly fishing education. Okay, well, here's some ideas that you can now pass on to that person. Because again, there is a certain comfort and a certain certitude when you are fishing small streams. But you can take those same skills and think about your large rivers as just a series of small streams, and go from there. So again, a lot more that you could talk about this, and a lot more I talk about this at the fly fishing show. And maybe I'll do a part 2 and fill some of those holes in here on the podcast. But again, if you are around either this year or I assume next year, then I would love to have you in person at one of my presentations. All right, this week on castingacross.com, the first article was called "The Best Action for Small Stream Fly Rods." Now, this is something I've talked about in bits and pieces all over the place on podcasts and live presentations over the last few weeks, as well as on the website. But here I have an entire article, like 800 plus words, devoted to why I think the most effective and efficient fly rod for you to use on a small stream is the one that you're comfortable with. But I also think that if you are really wanting to do the most, have the most cast, the most places with the most accuracy, a medium fast action rod, not a noodle style little rod that bends over double when you catch a little brook trout, which is awesome. I have no problem with that. But I think for a level of efficiency that we're going for, a medium fast action rod is the best. So a lot of caveats in there, but this is an article worth reading if you like fishing small streams. And then Wednesday's article is called "Video, Remembering Forgotten Salmon," talking about a probably relatively unknown book called, I think relatively unknown doesn't make sense, but you know what I mean, called "The Forgotten Salmon of the Merrimack River." And it is about a conservation project. The book was published by the Department of the Interior. It was a conservation project of reintroducing Atlantic salmon to the Merrimack River, which starts in New Hampshire, flows down into Massachusetts, just a tremendously large river. I think I used that word like 3 or 4 times in the video. When it enters into the Atlantic in Massachusetts. But because of dams and all the textile manufacturing that happened a century and a half ago, the salmon were depleted as they were inhibited from getting to their spawning grounds. But this is a book from 1981, so it's interesting because it's writing about things that happened and attempts, initiatives in the past and how they failed, how they thought it were going to work, and now living in the area, I have the benefit of kind of seeing kind of by the time the contemporary literature is 15 years after this book was written. But then you also have newer stuff, and it shows some of the missteps and just some of the insurmountable odds that they were up against. So, interesting book, short read. If you're into Atlantic salmon, if you're into conservation, if you're into the removal of dams, definitely a book worth checking out. There's a link for that, of course, over at that video over on YouTube. This week's recommendation on the podcast is a piece of cold weather gear that I have really enjoyed using for duck hunting, deer hunting, and fly fishing in the wintertime over the last few seasons. Now, it's from Cabela's Bass Pro Shop, so they change things up a little bit every year, but this is effectively the same piece of equipment. It's the Northern Flight. Now, here's the name of the product, right? You'll click on the link if you want it. Northern Flight Foremost Wind Shear Extreme Beanie. Okay. Now, yeah, you have warm hats. It's all fine and good. Here's why I like this one. It's first of all, it's only $30, and it goes over top of a ball cap, which I love. Okay. You can wear it by itself, which is fine and good. Covers your forehead. You can wear glasses with it, and it gives you like complete coverage down to right above your eyebrows. But you can also wear it with a ball cap. And there's ear flaps, but they pop up, and it's also not like ear flaps like the bomber hat, which I think is awesome. And if the weather is like extreme, then I definitely like wearing a bomber hat. But this is a nice kind of really cold but not extremely cold hat to wear. Although I think you probably could wear it when the weather gets really, really nasty if you pop a hood over top of it. But it is windproof, which is huge to keep your head warm. And the fact that it fits by itself a little bit loose, but then really, really well over top of a ball cap, I think is a great accessory to have in your bag. And then we can get that brim and all the protection that it affords to your eyes and your vision and glare. But again, it's something you can get at Bass Pro or Cabela's. $30, great little hat. It crunches down good. I always have it in my backpack when I'm hunting in the wintertime. And I think it would be something that you would enjoy. It's a little bit better than just a kind of a knit watch cap to throw on if you are fishing or hunting in the cold weather. So definitely check that out. I'll put a link for it down in the show notes of this podcast page over at Casting Across. Thanks for listening to the Casting Across Fly Fishing Podcast. Please subscribe in your favorite podcast app and rate the podcast in Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Then head over to castingacross.com for 3 posts a week on the people, places, and things that go into the pursuit of fish.